Welcome, everybody. Please take a seat. We get started in just a second. Oh, you're so fast. Look at that. All right. Welcome to the Past President's Plenary. My name is Gary Langham. I'm the AAG Executive Director. The AAG Presidential Achievement Award was established by the AAG Council to recognize individuals who have made long-standing and distinguished contributions to the discipline of geography. The AAG Past President chooses up to 2 individuals to recognize during the year they serve in office. So now let me introduce the Past President, Patricia Ehrkamp, who I've had the great pleasure to work with very closely. I've been very honored to do so these past few years. And Patricia is in the Arts and Sciences, is the Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professor of Geography at the University of Kentucky. She is a political and feminist geographer whose research includes immigration, borders, refugee geopolitics, citizenship, and migrant transnationalism, work that straddles political, feminist, cultural, and urban geographies. She is especially interested in the role of spaces of everyday life in the areas and processes that she studies. Under her leadership these past few years, she has convened the Mentoring Task Force, which is sharing and listening to our participants at several listening sessions during this meeting. So please join me in welcoming Patricia and her panelists, well, actually Patricia first and then the panelists, right, to the stage to tell us more about the Past President's Address. Welcome.
Okay. Trying to work on this technology here. It's not working. Great. Hi, geographers. Come on. Hi. Thank you, Gary. And just in case you're expecting a whole traditional Past President's Address, I will disappoint. We're doing a bit of a mashup today where I'll talk a little bit about why I think making spaces of possibility matters and matters right now. And then our plan is to have a conversation with this year's Presidential Achievement Award winners. Before I do that, it's been a tremendous honor to serve the AAG as president, vice president, now past president, but I couldn't have done any of the work by myself. So I want to start the session with profound gratitude. Gratitude for the immense dedication that AAG staff has shown over the past few years, despite dealing with a very difficult financial situation, cuts, and personnel restructuring. And gratitude for the numerous colleagues who have volunteered their time, energy, and wonderful insight as they serve on AAG Council, our numerous standing committees and task forces, and the boards of our specialty and affinity groups. Gratitude as well for all the outstanding scholarship, service, and teaching that we are able to honor with our awards every year, and 2 of these awards we're giving today. All of this collective work and dedication is deeply appreciated, and all of us here at this meeting benefit greatly from the work everybody does. So for a minute here, please give a round of applause to AAG staff and council for their hard work. I begin with gratitude because it reminds me that our work as geographers matters and continues despite deeply challenging times that affect our discipline and the academy more broadly. Despite challenging times that are geopolitically problematic and deeply isolationist ideologies that keep many of our colleagues from crossing borders to come to our annual meeting and to participate in these spaces for intellectual engagement and exchange that our meeting normally creates. We're finding ourselves in a period of serious restructuring of higher education institutions in the name of, in the name of demographic and budget challenges. Equally as, or maybe even more important for geography as a discipline and higher education more broadly, are the serious political challenges that directly affect our work as scholars, educators, and students. We are all aware of the ongoing assaults on academic freedom in K through 12 and in higher education. Attacks abound on critical inquiry, African American studies, critical race theory, feminist and queer theory, academic freedom, and broadly speaking, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, as well as on tenure, which is one of the institutions that was intended to safeguard academic freedom. Some of these initiatives are explicitly retaliatory efforts, for example, multiple lawsuits suing universities with diversity programs. Achille Mbembe so aptly diagnosed the spirit of our times, as he calls it, diagnosed it in 2019 already as, quote, a merry and frenzied nano-racism that is utterly moronic, that takes pleasure in wallowing in ignorance, and that claims a right to stupidity and to the violence that it institutes, end quote. Other commentators and scholars have explicitly pointed to the policing of academic freedom and knowledge production as important ways of undermining democracy and moving toward more authoritarian approaches to government. As many of you know, these aren't just trends in the US. There are numerous attacks on academic freedom in the world that are increasingly aided by technology. Eve Darian-Smith observes that, quote, what makes these overt and covert forms of policing unique to the early decades of the 21st century is the rapid evolution of digital communications and AI that are creating new modes of surveillance and ways to undermine academic freedom. This digital surveillance is coupled with policies that dismantle shared governance, for example, in Texas and Kentucky, render academic speech state speech, as in Florida, and create surveillance of syllabi, classes, and publications in Texas, Florida, Ohio, and in the near future in Kentucky. Together, these developments are also contributing to highly uneven geographies of knowledge production across the US, and they create the need to defend and maintain spaces for learning, intellectual exchange, and occasionally fierce disagreement and debate. As such assaults on higher education and academic freedom multiply, it is critically important to have conferences like our annual meeting so we can get together and continue to learn from one another. With institutions of higher education threatened, it is important that professional and scientific associations like the AAG maintain their ability to provide spaces for inquiry and intellectual debate, and that they speak out on behalf of academic freedom and support the breadth of geography and all geographers. And I'm happy to report that AAG has done just that over the past few years. This includes staying committed to hosting an open and inclusive annual meeting. The AAG has been and continues to be a strong advocate and voice on behalf of geography and geographers. This has, of course, taken the shape of statements, variably calling on universities and departments to protect academic freedom. Council wrote in 2025, quote, that we call on all AAG members and particularly department chairs to uphold equity, human rights, and educational freedom across the breadth of geographic inquiry in their departments. I want to reiterate that call here. As geographers, we're not better off when we shrink our thematic reach or throw parts of our discipline under the bus. On the contrary, one of the great strengths of geography lies in the breadth of approaches and the ability to synthesize across them to tackle globally important questions such as climate change, water, and food security, to mention but a few. And I'm so very heartened and grateful that the AAG has been taking a proactive and vocal role as advocate on behalf of geography and academic freedom. AAG has done that through collaboration with other professional organizations, hosting a digital session for department chairs on maintaining academic freedom, or signing on to the American History Association's statement on campus protests that calls on institutions to uphold the right to diversity of opinions on college campuses and elsewhere. AAG also is one of the few professional and scientific organizations to uphold its commitments to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I'm very, very proud that we're standing by our commitments here. Thank you. Having said that, we still have work to do. It's a good thing my students aren't here. They'd be laughing, because that's what I tell them. So we have work to do as geographers, as a discipline, and as an organization. I want to stress here that the importance of speaking up on behalf of geography or geographers and academic freedom does not mean that there is no longer space for critique. To the contrary, I see some parallels here to how we think about democracy too. We know, of course, that democracy is a flawed concept and a flawed political system, but it is still a better one of the ones that we have. Ernesto Laclau, when he talked about democracy, he identifies the ambiguity of democracy as, quote, "It requires unity, but it is only thinkable through diversity," end quote. I think this ambiguity translates into academic disciplines and knowledge production, and I find the tension between unity and diversity productive. We can and we need to speak of geography and its contributions in holistic ways, and we also need to carefully understand that earlier approaches or iterations of how we do or did geography don't necessarily work for everyone, which is why there is criticism and challenges from within. We want to think about improving geographic knowledge production and how we do geography, the way we do research, and the ways we train and educate our students. There's room for critique and improvement. To give a quick example, Eden Kincaid and Lon Fritsche in 2022 examined the syllabi for courses on the history and philosophy of geography in a number of geography departments. And their analysis has, at least in my home department, helped invigorate conversations about our curriculum that in turn prompted critically important revisions to what we teach as core courses, who we read, and with whom. These kinds of engagements indicate how deeply our colleagues and students care about our discipline and how vastly invested they are in making geography a better, more inclusive, and more just place. It is these kinds of discussions and critically engaged conversations that have helped us come a long way towards challenging what Alexander Verhelia terms, quote, "the racialized and gendered suffering at the hands of political brutalization that are always already imbricated in the construction of modern humanity," and then the making of our discipline, I might add. To me, reading and listening to constructive criticism of the discipline and engaging in debate, fierce or gentle, is something I cherish as a practice of care. Last year's AAG Stanley Brunn awardee, Catherine McKittrick, has suggested that, quote, "the sharing of ideas, no beginnings, no ends, enables a terrain of struggle through which different futures are imagined." It is writing and thinking like hers that provides inspiration for making spaces of possibility, imagining better futures, and enacting more equitable worlds. But it is such sharing of ideas in the current challenging moment that is needed, deeply needed, desperately needed to counter the zeitgeist Achille Mbembe describes when he talks about the pleasure in wallowing in ignorance or claiming a right to stupidity alongside the violence it brings. Geographers, with our multiple perspectives, spatial thinking, multi-scalar approaches, and geographic imagination, are so very well positioned to challenge this stupidity and ignorance and to make spaces of possibility, or perhaps defiance, as they leverage geographic insight, knowledge, and tools to address current challenges to democracy, our environment, and to peaceful ways of being in the world. Geographers have the ability and the tools to work towards better futures, and our discipline of geography is better off when we do this in the spirit of collaboration, care, and solidarity across our different approaches, occasional disagreements, and deep commitments to challenging injustice. And I hope you'll join me in continuing this work. Thank you. These are some of my thoughts. Now on to the main part of the evening. I would like to invite Sarah Elwood and Nick Heynen to come and join me up here. As Gary said, the AAG recognizes individuals who have made long-standing and distinguished contributions to the discipline of geography. This year, the Presidential Achievement Award is presented to Sarah Elwood and Nick Heynen in recognition of their outstanding and sustained scholarly contributions. Specifically, Sarah is recognized for her work on participatory, collaborative, and community-based GIS, relational poverty, and the broader dedication of her research and scholarship to social justice in the contemporary world. And we have very fancy awards. We're going alphabetical, not in any order of other things. Nick has earned this award due to his work on urban social justice, ecological restoration, and his ongoing collaborative work with the Gitche community on Sapelo Island in Georgia. Congratulations. We're going to do a picture for Becky. There. On a more personal note, Sarah and Nick are both geographers whose work I've been admiring and reading for a long time. And both of them are lovely and wonderful people. Beyond the impact of their scholarship, their dedication to mentoring and broadening the tent of geography, and their leadership in community-focused projects have had an enduring influence. It is work like Nick and Sarah's that inspired the theme, Making Spaces of Possibility, for last year's meeting, because both of them do so in their daily lives as geographers. I'll do a proper introduction now. Sarah Elwood is professor and chair of geography at the University of Washington. Her research focuses on digital technologies, urban geographies, and creative politics forged by structurally disadvantaged peoples fighting for equity, self-determination, and everyday thriving. She has studied the use of geographic information systems by neighborhood groups fighting gentrification and racial dispossession, interactive online mapping by children whose spatial knowledge and agency often go unseen, digital apps used in low-barrier employment by unsheltered people living and working in public space, and visual poverty politics advanced by unsheltered people and their allies. Sarah also co-founded and co-directed the Relational Poverty Network with Vicki Lawson, and she's past editor of Progress in Human Geography. Nick Heynen is Distinguished Research Professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Georgia, a visiting scholar in food studies at Spelman College, and the Director of Education for the Athens-based nonprofit organization Shell to Shore. His research interests sit at the intersection of economic, environmental, climate, and racial justice. For just over a decade, he has been working with members of the saltwater Gitche in the hog hummock community on Sapelo Island on the restoration of traditional agricultural practices and flood mitigation made necessary as a result of descendants losing their land to development pressure and increasing sea level rise leading to more frequent flooding. Nick has also served as part of the editorial collective and Antipode, and he was founding chair of the Institute for Geographies of Justice. He served as an editor for the Annals of the AAG and is founding editor of the University of Georgia Press book series, Geographies of Justice and Social Transformation. So I'm excited that you two are here. What we're going to do now is I have asked these guys a few questions so you can learn a little bit more about their work, and we'll try and answer them, right? So before we start, I wanted to, did I break something? Oh, good. I wanted to invite you both to talk a bit more about your work and how it has changed over time. So to give you an opportunity to highlight whatever you like about your scholarship.
Oh, okay.
We're having what in Minnesota is called a good manners style.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sarah.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a real privilege, real honor. Thanks for coming. I think that, having pondered some of the questions in advance, my answers are not great. In that I don't feel like, and this is probably true of many of us, like there's never been a plan. There was never a strategy. There was never an idea as to exactly what was going to happen next, which sounds a little willy-nilly or lazy perhaps, but I think that I came into the discipline as someone that was very interested in activism and organizing, and while I've improved my thinking about how organizing works, it started in just kind of listening and looking for opportunities. And I think that the opportunities that have been presented to me through a lot of different ways have largely shaped my research trajectory that I think many people have said to me kind of straight up, like, there's no clear thread, it's like it's all over the place, and that's something I have to think about, I guess, or deal with. I think that I was a philosophy and religious studies double major until I found Antipode. I think that is kind of part of a story. Like I was leafing through the pages and I saw that we could talk about how to create different sorts of spaces, and I think so the idea of making spaces of possibility, it feels very at home in me as far as what I think that this discipline does or can do and should be doing. I guess the last thing that I'll say, just as an opening gambit, is that very few people know this about my PhD work, just 'cause. But I started off doing work in South Africa. Studied Zulu for 3 years. Was like really, well, Bill knows this because we were on a panel together when I was like a master's student, if something about that, yeah. And life crumbled around that project in a way that I owe a lot to, because I was forced to realize that either I had to pack it in and not do this job, or I had to be more resilient or more resourceful and figure out that I like doing this job and I could do it in different ways. And Eric Swingado, once upon a time, gave me some of the best advice, which I now pass on, which is, you can ask big questions in lots of different contexts. It really comes back to the motivation for the work and the motivation for the sorts of things that you want to figure out. So from that perspective, the world is wide open of a lot of important things to think about and to engage in. And so that has oftentimes driven the way that I have kind of worked through my career so far.
Patricia's already noted a handful of the topical things that I work on, so I won't sort of say them again. I guess as I think across the things I've done in my career, and in geography, the way that we give ourselves and each other permission to work across many different things over a career it's one of the things that I will always cherish. But as I think about the common thread, it's really that I am most curious about the kinds of minor politics and unruly actions that powerful systems and people and institutions think don't matter. The micro details of possibility that sit within what otherwise seems impossible. That's the common thread, sort of practically. So the idea that a technology like GIS, by the powerful, for the powerful, could be engaged in community-based redevelopment without firing the engines of gentrification. That was unthinkable 30 years ago. The people of Powderhorn Park were doing it. Thinking about, that the digital spatial stories of kids could give us vital knowledge about how racial injustices are lived and acted upon by young people. Unthinkable. The kids of Aki Kurosi Middle School showed us how that would work. Like Nick, my work has changed in ways that were not necessarily part of some Uber plan. There's this quote from Frederick Buechner that always speaks to me. He wrote that a vocation is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need. And that's not something you know through some Uber plan. And those of you who know me will know I'm a planner. We know these things. I think it's about trying to hear what the people in places around us are pointing toward and what the curiosities of our own heart in that are pointing toward and trying to act on it. I think it's also, for me, over the course of career, these changes have been made possible by being open to being a novice. So when Vicki and I started collaborating around what became the Relational Poverty Network, critical poverty studies was completely new to me. And the Relational Poverty Network, the people who came together around it, changed our thinking in some really profound ways over many years. In digital geographies, I've been trying to rejig my thinking around a deeper engagement with queer and feminist thought, digital humanities, Black digital studies. More recently, with my terrific grad student in the room, we're trying to think about feminist bicycle justice, the feminist bicycle activism. And I can't tell you where that is going to lead, but it is animated by that same curiosity of the micro details of possibility that teach us something again and always under profoundly difficult circumstances that we all find ourselves in a variety of institutions and worlds right now.
Thank you both for that. The next question is really, I'm curious why you do this work. I think I have a good sense of why, but I'm going to make you say it anyway. And because both of you work so much with communities, I'd like to learn a little bit more about how you go about this work, or talk about some of the joys and challenges of this.
Do you want to switch off? Yeah, let's switch off. Yeah, because the first person to go then has to go first every time, and that's a bummer.
You're so good.
This is not our first rodeo.
Really?
Why we do the work we do. I mean, really, I do this work because of people in place. You know, the lives of my small-town Midwestern relatives have taught me a lot about doing what you can, where you are, with what you have. You know, those are some of the questions that shape me. You know, my interest in the poetic brilliance of community organizers, that was stoked at Macalester College in the early 1990s in the traditions of Minnesotan life that we have been seeing all around us these last months. You know, it's a curiosity that's shaped by having come out in the 1990s. You know, my friends and I were crafting queer life in the joys and the tragedies of that time. You know, you talk about the urgency of, in our conceptual and political lives, holding ambiguity. For me, queer life is a basis. We learn these things in lots of ways. That's where I learn it. You know, the AIDS epidemic and state abandonment, together with the profound tenderness of mutual aid and community care that were forged in that time. You know, the first state-level rights protections and the avalanche of homophobic, transphobic legislation that came afterward. You know, I do this work because I met Lisa Faustino when I was starting graduate school.
Yay, Lisa.
That's her sister and our niece. She was doing community organizing in all these places, on all these issues, and so it has to be said that my research, my theory, my politics are inextricable from the life that we've crafted together in the last 30 years. I'm going to let Nick go to the question of why he does what he does, and then maybe we can circle back to, like, doing work in community. Okay. Awesome.
I think I've just actually recently figured out the answer to this question, which feels lucky timing in lots of ways. I was exposed to some pretty nasty white supremacy when I was very young. And I didn't know what it was, and I couldn't name it, and I couldn't figure it out. And it was happening in part of my family. And at the same time, all of my friends were black and brown, so it was being expressed on me in particular ways. Like, why was I dressing black, for example? And in middle school, people calling me Oreo because I was the white stuff in the middle of this kind of dark circle of friends in the schoolyard. And, you know, as I was going through middle school and high school, like I felt these things, but I didn't understand them. And that's why I started doing organizing, and especially anti-racist organizing in Indiana, where the Klan had, you know, kind of a long history. And so when I say that I was like fumbling forward, it wasn't just like aimlessly. It was because I was seeking some clarity or how to make some of these feelings legible. And you know, like I was just talking about Fred Donaldson's, you know, article in the first issue of Antipode as like one of these things that I read a long time ago that was like, oh wow, okay, there's a lot of other things going on here that I can, like, if I can just focus a little bit and like pick a lane, that I can learn. And so I kind of proceeded you know, largely on a journey of self-discovery, I would say, you know, that has kind of motivated me and inspired me in very interesting ways. I think one of the things that happens to me at some point in graduate school is that I just start reading a lot of Marx and Marxist geography. And it took me away from some of I mean, not like in a bad way, I don't mean that in a bad way, I'm very grateful that I did that. But it didn't quite align with the organizing and the political kind of sentimentality that I had. So I was always feeling a little off in that work. And then, you know, as the Black radical tradition has really become much more legible to me, and thanks to, you know, great geographers and scholars and friends, you know, I'm able to kind of exist in my head in a very kind of unorthodox space that really comes back to these questions of, you know, fundamental questions of equality, of equity, of justice. You know, with some different kind of specificities to them. And so I think it is that burning in me that is kind of why I started doing this work, and why I love doing this work. I mean, I wake up every day excited to be able to think and keep going.
Joys and challenges of community-based work just about covers it. I guess, as you all know in your own work, being in community with people that are working hard to change the places and structures of their lives, it's joyful, it's awe-inspiring, it's instructional. Bringing students into that mix is all of those things, and it's really hard. I always say you shouldn't do it if you're prone to worry, and I'm like the chief fuss budget. When I am doing this kind of work, I always feel like I'm failing. There's always something that feels like it's on the edge of blowing up the project, the relationships, something. And I guess what leaning into that has taught me is that it is sticking with that discomfort that makes the work possible, and trying to just strengthen my own muscle for sitting with those challenges. It's career-long work, and it's sort of learning the lesson that if you screwed up, and Lord knows I have, that the work of repairing is also vital to moving forward in the face of powerful challenges, be they urban, environmental, and so on, all of the things that we're talking about. I also think that giving ourselves some space to understand and sort of embrace the ways that our community-engaged work changes over the course of a career is healthy, in the sense of the sort of work that I did in Minneapolis and that I did in Chicago in this moment of life in the academy is not possible to also do while being a responsible chair. There's just only not enough of me to go around in any given day. And so, like, being at peace with the fact that the community-engaged work that I most need to be doing right now may well be in our campus spaces in this moment that higher education is under a particular sort of an assault. And so I guess the change and transformation that we get to be part of, where it is and what that looks like, I think for me has shifted a lot over the course of a career. This has been an opportunity to think about that.
I think I'd have to go back to like when I was an undergrad. I started trying to do voter registration with the Monroe County NAACP, and I couldn't have felt more awkward or uncomfortable, trying to like shake my first set of hands just because I felt like I didn't belong there kind of mindset, and it was a very important lesson in terms of community for me. Because what happened after I extended my hand feeling awkward is that people put me at ease. People that I was working with, organizers in that community. And I think there have been a lot of different points, and one especially that actually, I mean, I guess it's 20 years ago now, but it still feels like yesterday, and I'm going to curse if that's all right. Can I just say one curse word? Will anyone be all right with that? It's a quote, so it's not me just being... when I had my first job at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, I was doing work on the Black Panther Party's Free Breakfast for Children program that kind of came about organically because I was doing organizing, activism, research around anti-hunger organizing that was happening contemporarily within Milwaukee. And I just kind of fell into these amazing oral history interviews with a lot of former Black Panther Party members because they had not been asked the questions about their survival programs. They had been asked about the guns and the berets and the fancy leather coats. So when I came at them with these like very important questions for them, they opened up to me, and I just had this amazing access to like all the living founding members and lots of other folks. And one day I was sitting in my office at Milwaukee late one night, and my phone rang, and I answered it. This is where I'm going to curse. And someone said, "Is this Heynen?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I could tell that it was an older African-American woman. And she said, "You motherfucking cracker, stop stealing our people's history." And she hung up on me. So this was one of these like, for a lot of folks that are like questioning how they are doing things in the world, that one came at me pretty good. That one kind of put me in the fetal position under my couch for about 6 months kind of scenario. And I had a conversation with someone who was the lead curator at the Black Holocaust Museum in Milwaukee, who had become a friend and a colleague and a mentor and a guide. And I was sitting down like on a milk crate. I remember it very well. Sitting on a milk crate, like all down, like, "Oh, I got to stop doing this work. I got to quit. I can't do it anymore." And he's like, I'm going to curse again. "Are you fucking crazy?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? I'm stealing, I'm exploiting, I'm like appropriating people." He's like, "Nick, look, here's the thing. Everyone gave you so much time, right? For some reason. Like whatever the reason was, like you connected with them. Like that's how community works, right? If you don't keep doing this work, you're doing a disservice to all of their time." And that was like this really important moment for me to think about community and how we build community and how we don't force ourselves into community and looking for those signs of like being brought in. There's a lot of ways we get brought in, and most of the times I think many of us don't recognize them. They just like zoom right by us because we're busy or whatever. And I think that has been something as I've keep going farther and farther in this job that I try to be more attentive to, is those opportunities or those invitations to build community. And I think there's especially in these times,
I have more questions, thank you. But because you mentioned these times, I mentioned these times, we're all living in these times. So I want to think about or hear about what keeps you going when it gets tough.
I can't remember, is it my turn to go first or yours?
I have at it. He just stopped.
Yeah, catch my breath. Well, I mean, I guess there are these episodes that happen to us, and I've just given you a few of them. I'll share one more that is the most profound, and I'm still kind of thinking through it. And I don't think I'll ever really make sense of it, but it is a driver. In 2022, January, I had just started teaching at Spelman College. I had been asked through a very complicated and confusing set of circumstances if I would be willing, and I said, yes, please. And on one of the very first emails that I got in my new Spelman account was that there had been a bomb threat on the campus. And I remember just being like, whoa. And I knew not to tell my partner, my wife, because I knew that if I told her, she wouldn't let me go there, to work. And so she got a little pissed off at me later when I told her that it happened and I had to go to work, because it just felt like I had to show up, and that showing up led to a series of conversations with young, very frightened Black women about how they were experiencing these times. That's 2022. It's still, it's still pretty hairy. And this is on the heels of the pandemic. So mental health is already at an all-time low for, people that are had to do high school online. And those sets of conversations that I had and still kind of have at Spelman are one of the most powerful motivators that I've ever experienced. Because a world opened up to me that I don't feel like I could have otherwise experienced, and I didn't experience it, but just have a knowledge of. And I think to hear the terror and the fear that these brilliant students were experiencing, it just fucking made me so angry. It made me so angry. Sorry, now I'm cursing all the time. And I think that, there are lots of other things like that I just read and think about. Those are the things. Anger is not something that I experience too much unless it's funneled in this kind of a motivational way.
What keeps me going in hard times? Students, students, students. I think, one of the great gifts of this profession is getting to witness people crafting themselves in new and consequential ways over and over and over again. That is something that I sort of didn't imagine that would be part of the profession when I was in grad school. You're just trying to get through. Or that I would fall in love with being part of that, and yet here we are. Because I think that... So last week, I read this terrific paper in Area by somebody I don't know called Maria Solda Pepa. It's a paper on pedagogies of hope. And in part of that paper, she says, hope must be actively cultivated as a practice of doing geography. And I guess that practice of doing geography, that's fundamentally what we are doing with our students in all the sites and ways that we do it. And I think so many of my deeply instructional, transformational oh shit moments in my career that are like yours come from doing this work with students. So in Chicago, in Tucson, in Seattle, in various ways, I've done community-based map and digital app projects in which teams of students were coming together with community groups, working together on projects. And it's, remember when I said you shouldn't do this work if you tend to worry? It's a sort of profoundly instructional act of letting go because, you're accountable to your community partners. You feel that responsibility, but you're not the one that is delivering on that. You're inviting students into community with you and with the community organizations to try to do the thing. And I guess one of the reasons that those kinds of projects keep me going is because there is, in all the years on all the projects and all the groups, I can think of only one project that crashed and burned. And what an amazing witness to the work of people coming together in a common project, often to do something that none of us knew how to do. That's always, in our easiest teaching moments, we're confident because we know what's going to happen, we know what we are trying to catalyze and what's going to come out at the other end. I'm looking at Matt Wilson, who also teaches these kinds of classes. In the GIS workshop, you never kind of know what's going to happen. And yet, this is why it really helps if you have a social worker at home who's like, oh, just give it another week. I think if you just explain it again, this time they're going to get it. And yet, that sort of the enduring practice of hopeful possibility with our students, it has so much to teach us about everything that confronts us in this time.
Thank you both so much for this. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions from the audience, but both of you mentioned working with students and that's a big part of what you do and what keeps you going. So, and I know you both have done a lot of mentoring, which is something I'm reasonably invested in myself. So could you talk a little bit about your practice of mentoring, why you do it, what you do? I'm sure our early career folks are curious, and not just the early career ones.
My own mentors showed me that showing up for people is the simplest and most powerful act of love. And it makes us steadfast, and it makes us strong. And that matters because creativity is really hard. And we are in all of the things that we do as scholars, it's creative work. It is vulnerable. You are creating something. It is of you and the worlds you're trying to understand. Like, every one of you has ridden that hope and despair roller coaster, right? And so, like, mentoring is being on the hope and despair roller coaster with somebody. And there's so many, I mean, and all this is even before we get to the sort of hardwiring of academia around elitism and masculinism and all of it. Mentoring is one of those foundation blocks of an actually inclusive university. And so in that sense, it is work that is available to all of us to do. You know, the mentoring relationships, especially across difference, I think are, again, a foundation for interrupting some of the structures of harm in academia that we know, we critique, we have lived, and been complicit in. Like, that accountability for that is part of it. You know, I think at its best, mentoring gives us a chance to, I mean, you're always holding space for the work. And to, like, it's not mine to pass judgment on the work or what it should be. It is to ask the inductive questions, to try to understand the project on their terms, on its own terms. But I think it's also like, so it's about the work, and I think we're rejigging some of the kind of cultures of academic life. You know, the culture of no feedback, or the only feedback you get is critique. Mentoring is one of those great gifts to, like, it's your job to notice what people are good at, what are their strengths and aptitudes, and tell them, you know, what greater work can there be? You know, or to, like, not do the sort of academic culture of too busy. We all have a lot on, and yet you've also experienced the ways that the performance of too busy, like, kills the seeds of relationship before they are even sown. And, like, we get to do that. Yeah, those are some of the, I think, the basic principles. I mean, institutions and the institution of the academy, it's nothing magic. It's people, rules that they have set to govern one another, and cultures. And that, like, thinking about it in that sense gives me, it makes those systems seem much more tractable for our collective interventions. Like, that kind of analytic feels like, it makes it seem more like a space of possibility where we can unwrite some of the wrongs.
I've said more than once that I feel like geography saved my life, which is a funny, like, thing. You know, I talked about changing my major and these various things, but, like, I really, like, felt like I came into myself once I kind of got on that road, and I couldn't have done that had it not been for my mentors. You know, Dan Knutson was my supervisor at Indiana University, which shocks a lot of people because it doesn't make any sense if you look at Dan's work and you look at my work. But Dan was just there for me. You know, Dan was, he would show up and you know, I mean, little story. I mean, I once upon a time at 11 p.m. knocked on his office window at his house because I was having a crisis. And he did not hesitate to come outside and kind of talk me down. You know, I would never do that again. And I'm sorry that I did it then. I feel bad. But like that's this showing up. And so, you know, because of that, I feel this immense gratitude and this need to pay it forward in a way that it drives a lot of the, you know, my interest in mentoring. One of the things that happened, though, is that because of Dan's interests and the way in which my interests started to grow, I had to build a network of, when I was a PhD student, a network of other interlocutors or mentors, and I would reach out to people whose work I was reading, which, you know, right now it feels like a naive, you know, a version of myself before, like, that's kind of bold, you know, you're sending these emails to these, like, senior geography, you know, cool people, and 201, every one of them responded to me, you know, and like in the best possible ways, like, yeah, I'll have a coffee with you at the thing, yeah, and you know, maybe I just got lucky, but I don't think so. I think that it just has to do with there's something about, you know, many of us in this discipline that want to give back and want to be in conversation and you know, had those experiences ourselves. So, you know, I try to make time whenever possible. You know, even when it's not possible sometimes, I try to make time, just because it just feels like that's the most important thing that I'm probably going to do is have some of those conversations. It's going to be far more important than sitting here with y'all, no offense, or, you know, or this, or, you know, the talk that I just gave. I mean, it's those really human connections and that mentoring and that advice when people get stuck that feels like the most important thing.
Great, thank you for that. We will have time for some questions from the audience if you care to ask questions. Anybody need some mentoring?
Didn't you tell us you were going to answer all the hard questions?
Yeah.
Nope. That was another email from somebody else. But we do have time. We have microphones if you want to ask questions.
Or answer one of the questions that we asked for
Yes.
yourself.
Yes, please, in the back.
Hi, thank you. I'm so grateful for the contributions you've made to the scholarship in geography. Your work has been very inspiring and influential. I'm curious if you could speak a little more to our current moment, if that's something you're comfortable doing, in terms of like, because I feel like I've struggled with figuring out how do I prepare this next generation. You know, I'm at a small liberal arts college, all undergrads. The world that we're heading into, we all know that we can't really predict. And I'm curious from your vantage point, what do you see as the tangible ways that we can communicate to our students what they're studying for? And if you have advice for us also, how we can move forward and make that as vague as possible.
Your turn.
I think one of the most powerful things we can do is be compassionately honest about how high the stakes are and how uncertain we are and how much the histories of the communities that we are a part of and learn from have to teach us. There was a moment shortly after the inauguration where I was sitting in a faculty meeting with our faculty, you know, as the assault on higher education, this version of the assault on higher education was starting, and all kinds of disturbing things were happening, even in our blue state. And you never know what you're going to say in that moment when they look at you. You just hope that whatever comes out doesn't make it worse, and maybe make some kind of sense. And what I remember saying is, look, I have no idea what's going to happen about X, Y, Z, P, D, or Q. But the thing that I am utterly sure of is that the communities that each of us comes from and has learned from, we are the sum total of all of that wisdom, and that gives us a great basis to survive this moment. And I think it is that, again, we don't know, and the stakes are very high. Part of what I think we're trying to strengthen students for is that the muscle of preparing for the uncertainty. You know, in a much smaller scale, like in particular kinds of classes, I can't know exactly whether this or that skill or aptitude or idea is going to translate. But what I do know is that it's all, and I think we all know because we do it, is it's going to add up to a strength of possibility for an unknowable future. I know that's a really airy-fairy kind of a response, but yet I think the traditions of theory and life that teach us how to survive a moment like this would believe that.
I think for me, in this question, which is a hard question, is like a kind of a back to basics in many ways. Like, I set up my classes when we start off and we just start talking about like active listening, you know, like things that like I think many of us struggle with, you know. And I have all these like exercises that I make us do where we're like, are we actually listening to one another, you know? I think a lot, I teach a lot early in all of the versions of classes about critical thinking, you know, just like the basic stuff, just like things that I think many of us probably take for granted, or maybe not, I don't know. But, you know, when I experience students that are, you know, from Georgia, you know, and there's a spectrum, both at UGA and Spelman, you know, they are hungry to be pushed in ways of opening up is what I find. If I can create a space. So, you know, like I always try and get my classes set up in a circle, you know, just like some of those like organizing traditions where I try and pound down the hierarchy. I try and kind of prefigure, you know, some of the politics and, you know, some little performative ways. And it's just those little things, you know, it's not dealing with the crises, the existential crises that are out there. But I think that they start to come around to seeing those crises in different ways. Like another thing in the critical thinking aspect of this is just like really hammering asset versus deficit thinking, you know, which, you know, I'm sure many of us do that, but I have like this scaffolding that I now put onto every class, which is like trying to generate a more optimistic way of being together in those spaces that hopefully builds up that resilience for them when they go off into other spaces. Also airy-fairy, although I didn't think yours was airy-fairy, but you know, I think we have limited time. And I guess the other thing that I think about, actually this is my true answer. Scrap all of that. Let me start over. I mean, I insist on being optimistic. When I teach, I do not get down on the world. And that's hard, and sometimes I gotta lie, you know, sometimes I gotta fake it. But just like Howard Zinn in his, memoir talks about, like, being pessimistic just doesn't do anything for anyone. It's not good for politics. It's not good for your health. It's not good for anything. So if you could push yourself, even if in particular ways. So when I teach from that perspective. And I often tell them that, like, I'm just not going to get down on these things right now. It doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about them or think they're horrible, because I do. But I think it's about the framing.
I see you. I'm coming to you. You could be. Go for it, and I'll give you the mic when I get there.
We have more than one microphone.
Also, like, legitimately, I am a yeller, so it could have been fine. I just want to thank all of you. I think, like, for a lot of us, myself for sure, you're people we love and respect from a distance, even though we don't know you personally, and hearing your remarks is really affirming of that. And now I'm going to cry. No, but I'm here with a bunch of my undergrads who are thinking about grad school and whether that's the right path, and and I think, like, what we do can be really magical, and I also think it can be a real mixed bag, and so I'm not trying to sell any of you. But however, I guess I'm wondering if you could tell me and them, what's the thing that makes you so glad you did this, even though it's really hard sometimes?
Either one, or I can go.
When I was at a T-junction in my undergraduate years trying to decide which path to take, and one of them was to go to grad school in geography, I had not talked to the English professor who taught my first year seminar in 3 years. And so I went to see him, and he said, and he listened to all the options, and then he said, I don't think you can know. Yes, grad school often leads to a career in higher education. There's no way for you to know at this moment whether that is the right path for you. The only way to begin to find out is to try this thing. And if it's not for you, that's okay. The worst thing that you'll be able to say is that after 2 years, 4 years, you spent 2 to 4 years working on things that you're really fired up about and that matter in the world. And it just lowered the stakes in a particular way that I feel like has followed me, of you don't have to know it all and how this domino leads to that one and that one and that one. In all of it, in our university lives, in our life, in our community life, you just have to try to figure out what is the next right thing, the next hard, important thing, and do that. And I feel like that has sort of kept me it's lowered the stakes in a way that has allowed me to be more intentional. And like higher education, we have to be honest, universities in the system in which we were educated and in which we have been educating is changing profoundly in ways that are precarious, frightening, uncertain for all of us. But I think being honest about that and staying present to the project of what is going to be fought for and built in these coming years, like that's the work. We are still in the business of building and sustaining relationships that allow us to work on hard ideas and hard problems. May that continue to be the case.
Sure. Okay, I can try. I'm not sure I'm convinced that I want to be in the academy, and I've been in it for a really long time, and I think that's been a really useful way of thinking about it. So I didn't have a choice. I actually had to go all the way to a master's because I did my work in Germany, and you could only do a master's at the time, so that part happened. And then I went on an exchange year and met my advisor at the lovely University of Minnesota, and went back to Germany, finished there, applied for a PhD program because I wanted to learn. And I loved the way that learning happens in the US Academy in ways that I had not experienced in Germany, even though I'd been kind of a geographer since 5th grade. So I will always say I'm a geographer. I'm not sure I want to be in the academy. For now, it's working. But still not convinced. So I think all of this is a way of saying, try it out, see if you like it. If you want to go to grad school because you want to learn, by all means, do it. Don't go into debt. No, if you apply to a master's program, there's ways of getting funding for these, so I'd encourage you to think about that. But try it, see if you like it. If you don't like it, there's so many other options.
I mean, I think that this title here is going to be part of my answer. I think that if you're interested in thinking about research that comes out of a problem framing orientation, there are a lot of big problems. And I think that, you know, I'm getting to a point, this work that was mentioned on Sapelo Island, you know, where I can put my finger on really good things that is happening because of geography and because I'm involved and the community that we've built, where, you know, we're mitigating sea level rise and, you know, we're getting grants and we're doing things that feel really important for a community that has been largely ignored. It took it's taken a decade, right? And I was at a career stage when I started doing that work that allowed for me to take my time, or a different kind of time frame. But I think there's a lot of good that can be done from these perspectives, and I think that's an answer. You know, that's a reason.
Got one here.
Thank you all for your reflections today. I'm an art historian, and this is my first AAG.
Welcome.
Thank you. My advisor has been encouraging me to come to AAG, and I wish I saw everybody in Hawaii, but you know, here we are, it's okay. I want to build on that last question about students who are thinking about pursuing a graduate career and the comments about not going into debt for graduate school. And I wonder how do we make space for that in mentorship? I think I have many mentors, but I don't necessarily know if I've always been given advice of like, okay, when you go for field work, this is how you protect yourself and this is what you do. I think I've just been thrown into the sharks and I'm figuring things out and I'm in a good place, but also the debt is there. And I think that there's other ways that we can navigate that and mediate that as mentors. Thank you.
Yes, yes, and yes. In my years as chair, I have learned so much from all of our grad students at UW, and especially their elected leadership over the years, who have insistently pushed me to see things about the workings of the institution that were not seeing their precarity or not responding to it in ways that are useful. And when I first became chair, Eric Shepard came to visit. He happened to be in Seattle. And, of course, I was like, my mentors are here. I'm going to ask lots of questions about being chair. And one of the things he said about being a chair and your relationship to the graduate student community was, we are in graduate school, everybody is honing their muscles for critique. And so it is to be expected that the community will practice those on you. Your mission is to not get mad about what is a completely expected phenomenon and to learn from and engage this as it's happening. And that was really pivotal in sort of nudging me to hear some of the things that our grads have said to us about how things could work different. And exactly those practical things about, I sometimes say most of what I know about money I've learned from my academic mentors in a very practical life sense. And everybody does mentoring and institutional life differently, but being open to, I try to open up life to grads who I am community with, not just how do I get the dissertation parsed out into 3 articles, but and we miss things. None of us can be everything to everybody. But I think you raised some really important issues that are fundamental to how grad school and life in the academy can work. Because those precarities are not just about grad school. Increasingly with sort of the housing and healthcare crisis that is national in this country, life for early career faculty is almost across the board practically impossible. And continuing to keep that in view as we move through the stage of career and we're in the kind of rooms where that is talked about, like, that's some of the work.
I wanted to respond and offer and reflect back to you, Sarah, who took the time to meet with me when I was at a pivotal moment in deciding whether I would go to a graduate program or not. Sarah took time. I did not end up going to her grad program. I applied a lot of what you all have shared on the stage today, the curiosity and the desire for curiosity, and ended up doing, not to talk about, it's just to paint what I'm saying, is I ended up in public, and public sector needs the critical engagement, the active listening skills to apply it to, as you say, the micro, what did you say? The micro details of possibility that sit within what feels impossible. And I wanted to reference you as well as your question over there in the hat, but getting into a public retirement savings early in your career is not a bad thing as a way to, a route to applying critical geography perspectives to, in my case, I practice GIS at a public sanitary and stormwater organization, but and the principles that I learned through your work, Sarah, and others too, are very relevant in my everyday spaces and relationships with colleagues, and also the possibilities within a public organization to continue to practice research and apply research questions to like real people's lives and the infrastructures that that we all use, like the toilets that we flush or something. So I just wanted to say that in the room, and sorry that I'm making us go longer, but it's a really important part of an option that people, I feel like there can be more bridges between academia and public sector. Not a question, sorry.
That's fine.
Oh, I see it.
Eric?
This is more a commentary and a reflection on what you've been saying than a question. Because I'm sitting asking myself these same questions to the point where it's too late, right? Because I'm already retired and so on. But listening to you reminds me of why I did what I did, which is to, as you put it, pay it forward in a way to help people practice the kinds of things which I think are important, that we think are important, who then pass it on to others. And so thinking about this, when you're a student, you ask yourself the question, well, is this something which has really been really important for me to make myself better and a more practical, a more optimistic person, to support me to the mentoring that I've gotten? And what about the next generations who I can pass that on to, because they will need that kind of help also. And we live in a very contradictory world, right? Because we're an academy which requires us to do all kinds of fancy research, and often teaching gets put on the side and mentoring gets put on the side. What I like about this conversation today is that we flipped that script. And I do think that geography, precisely because it's a marginalized discipline, not close to the corridors of power, has a space for us to experiment with and to challenge those norms in these kinds of ways. And with the breadth of the discipline, a quite unique space of possibility for that. And this is all about helping people think not just about, and again you've said this, right, not just about the world as a place which has all kinds of problems getting bigger all the time, but as a space where we can, through the practices that we teach, through the practices that we practice, find ways to create spaces of opportunity, spaces of possibility, spaces of optimism, and not just go down some kind of rabbit hole of doom scrolling and giving up and just going to work at McDonald's or whatever it is. So I'm not being very coherent here, but I really think that this is exactly why I did what I did, even though I produced a whole lot of articles. Those kinds of things at this point in my life don't seem to matter as much as the possibilities I've created for others or helped create for others with working with those others and seeing how that then concatenates down the line.
That is a wonderful comment. Usually I'm skeptical when people say it's just a comment, not a question, but this was lovely, and I think also a really great space or a great moment to end this session on. So thank you, Eric, thank you to Sarah and Nick, and thank you all for being here.